Today, we're going to discuss a paper that was recently published where the authors of this paper look at various neural computation from a space-time waves perspective, in that instead of just thinking about a single neuron and how it responds to various signals within the brain, the authors argue that we should think about the brain in terms of waves moving through space and time, exactly like ripples, for example, in water moves. They suggest that these brain waves are actually very powerful for several reasons. For example, when it comes to memory, they can help the brain hold on to information for longer periods of time. When it comes to the timing aligns better with the pace of real-world event for longer periods of time that we care about. And when it comes to flexibility, this perspective allows the brain to recognize patterns, symmetries, and abstract much more easily. And lastly, it appears to be a much more efficient way for the brain to process information, in that they can handle long distance connections in the brain more cheaply, if you will, and that way they are much more efficient. They save time and energy when it comes to brain. So let's go ahead and discuss this paper in more detail. Let's first look at what these authors mean when they say space-time waves. Essentially, they mean patterns of brain activities that spread out like waves across both space and time. And the idea is that neurons don't just fire in isolation, like on and off. Instead, large group of neurons often create rhythms or oscillations, aka brainwaves like alpha, beta, gamma, etc., where these oscillations don't stay stuck in one place. They travel across various brain regions, like different parts of the brain, like ripples move in the water when you throw a stone in the water, for example. Because they move like that across different brain regions, they carry information across these regions, coordinating them in time. So space-time waves are a way of thinking of brain computation not as a series of discrete neurons firing, but as information carried by traveling waves, aka brain waves, across space through time, across different regions of the brain, kind of like how radio waves or sound waves carry information, where these authors are suggesting that wave-based perspective may explain how the brain achieves memory, timing, pattern recognition, and efficiency. The title of the paper is A Spacetime Perspective on Dynamical Computation in Neural Information Processing System. And I'll add the link below as always. This paper presents a novel framework for understanding neural computation. Traditionally in neuroscience, we've been mainly focusing on spatially organized neural structures and feed-forward processing. However, this perspective often overlooks the dynamic, recurrent, and temporal aspects of neural activities. The authors of this paper propose a space-time perspective, emphasizing the inseparability of spatial and temporal dimensions in neural dynamics. Central to this framework is the idea that structured spatio-temporal dynamics, such as traveling waves or traveling brain waves and recurrent neural network, are not merely byproducts of neural processing, but integral to it. These dynamics enable neural systems to encode symmetries such as visual, temporal, and abstract as conserved quantities. By doing so, they facilitate improved generalization and long-term working memory. And this approach challenges the traditional neuroscience view that structured cell activity and dynamic neural activity as separate and often contradictory aspects of neural computations within the brain. By framing neural computation in this manner, in this spatio-time waves matter, the author suggests that the brain's dynamic properties are not incidental but essential to its computational capabilities. This particular perspective has implications for understanding various cognitive functions, including perception, memory, as well as decision making. It also offers insights into how neural systems can maintain stability and flexibility simultaneously, which is a balance crucial for adaptive behavior. Essentially, this paper advocates for a paradigm shift as to how we conceptualize neural computation by, for example, integrating spatial and temporal dimensions into a unified framework. The authors of this paper provide a comprehensive view of how neural systems process information potentially. This space-time perspective not only enhances our understanding of biological neural network, but also informs the development of more sophisticated and adaptive artificial systems, in this case, artificial neural networks, because this perspective has the potential to being incorporated in AI systems, in that it could achieve more robust performance from these AI systems, where this approach aligns with recent trends, for example, in our AI research, that emphasizes the importance of dynamic processing and temporal patterns in learning as well as in decision making. What are some of the evidence that we have for spatiotemporal dynamics, for example? In recent experimental studies, we've observed that traveling waves, that we've also talked about in this channel, and other structured spatiotemporal dynamics in various cortical regions of the brain. These findings challenge the conventional view that neural processing is primarily feed-forward and spatially organized. The authors, for example, argue that these dynamic patterns are not merely noise or artifacts of the waves, but instead they're integral component of neural computation. A central thesis of this paper is that spatio-temporal dynamics enable the encoding of symmetries such as visual or temporal or abstract symmetries. And this encoding allows the neural systems within the brain to do a generalization across different contexts and maintain information over time, thereby supporting functions like long-term memory and adaptive behavior. Essentially, this space-time perspective contrasts with static models that we've had in the past that depicts representations as fixed patterns. The dynamic nature of these representations enable the brain to adapt to changing environment as well as changing internal state within the entity itself. And one of the paper's significant contribution is reconciling that apparent contradiction between the structured selectivity and the dynamic processing, which is extremely important here, where the authors propose that these aspects are complementary rather than mutually exclusive, where structured selectivity refers to the brain's ability to respond preferably to specific stimuli, while dynamic processing involves the temporal evolution of neural activities. And so integrating these aspects, the space-time perspective that these authors propose, provide a more comprehensive understanding of the neural computations within the brain. To recap, Over centuries in neuroscience, we've focused on neurons as the basic unit of the brain. Neurons fire like switches, for example. They fire on or off. They're either on or off. That model has given us incredible insights. It's the basis of everything from brain scanning techniques to artificial neural networks, etc. But this particular paper argues that there's another equally important way to understand the brain. Instead of focusing only on one single neuron, we should also look at the waves of activity that travel across the brain between different regions. These aren't metaphorical waves, they are real electrical oscillations coordinated across groups of neurons moving to the brain's network and various brain regions. Imagine dropping a stone in a pond. Ripples spread outward, carrying information across space and through time, and that is what brainwaves do. Scientists have known about brainwaves for a long time, such as alpha, beta, gamma, etc. But the idea that traveling waves or traveling brainwaves are central to computation, it's still gaining traction. At first, this perspective might feel unintuitive. We're so used to thinking of neurons as firing like on and off switches. However, remember how in the physical world, things are not as black and white as we know them. They are wave-like, they are dynamic. And the authors in this paper make the comparison that just like, for example, in quantum mechanics added waves to our understanding of matter and space-time, it enhanced our knowledge about the world. This way, we could also potentially enhance our way of understanding the brain and how it potentially processes information. So what exactly do these brain waves do for us? This paper identifies several benefits. For example, first, when it comes to memory, these brain waves can hold information over extended period of time, keeping it active in the brain's working memory. Second, timing. Waves naturally match the timescales of events in the real world, helping us keep track of what matters moment to moment. Third, flexibility. Waves allow the brain to handle symmetry, abstraction, and repeating structures in ways that individual neurons per se cannot. Fourth, efficiency. Waves can link distant brain regions without relying on slow or expensive, in terms of energy waste, mechanisms. This efficiency points in especially interesting when we compare it, for example, to the artificial intelligence. The way we can potentially connect this efficient way of the space-time perspective of neural computation within the brain with artificial intelligence, it's through its efficiency. So in modern AI systems, for example, like transformers, handle long-range dependency using a mechanism called self-attention. Self-attention works incredibly well, but it's computational heavy and very expensive. It guzzles memory and processing power. Waves, by contrast, might be the brain's elegant solution to the same problem, a way to synchronize and correlate information cheaply, so to speak. This suggests that AI researchers could potentially learn a lot more by studying wave-based computations in the brain and not just the single neuron on and off switch type of computation within the brain. For example, how do we sustain attention on something for seconds at a time? How do we smoothly integrate signals from vision, hearing, touch, and memory all at once and in real time. How do distant brain regions like the prefrontal cortex and the visual cortex coordinate instantly despite being far apart? Traditional neuron to neuron signaling doesn't fully explain this, but traveling brain waves, can provide the missing link potentially. They allow information to be carried across both distance and time, aligning different parts of the brain like instruments in an orchestra, for example. This is why the researchers here describe these waves as space-time representations in the brain. They're not locked to one neuron or even one region of the brain. They unfold dynamically across the brain itself. The mathematics behind this framework, which is the space-time representation of information and computation within the brain, is still being developed, just as any other scientist, where we are just developing and continuously working on it. But the promise is enormous, a unifying theory that links neuroscience and potentially other technical aspect that we have in AI systems. More importantly, this paper doesn't say that we should throw out the traditional view in neuroscience, but use this space-time perspective of traveling brain waves as an additional information to enhance our understanding about the brain, where we can still study neurons firing, but now we can also study the brain waves that emerge from the collective activities within the brain. And by doing so, we may uncover principles that explain not just memory and attention, but consciousness itself. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, this could also potentially inspire a whole new generation of algorithms, ones that don't just copy neurons, but harness the dynamic of the brain waves of the brain itself. In short, this paper invites us to stop and seeing the brain as a machine of not only isolated switches, but start seeing it as a living sea of space-time waves, brain waves, a perspective that could potentially unlock a lot of things that we still do not know about the brain till today. Okay, guys, that's all I had for today. Thanks for watching. And a couple of you were wondering why I was, because I've been MIA. I was actually busy writing this, and it's just published, where I also talk about the symbiotic intelligence, where some of the things that was discussed in this paper, I also talk about it here, where the symbiotic intelligence presents ideas to connect the real-time traveling waves and or brain waves, so to speak, to the artificial neural network systems in order to enhance the future generation of AI, such as potentially AGI, ASI. They are still very speculative, but this discusses that. It also discusses the potentially challenge that we have in terms of incorporating those type of different information processing, where one is analog and one is digital, and how that could potentially become a hybrid system. It also discusses that. This is the second edition, by the way. The first edition was very, very, very big, long. This one is much shorter. So hopefully those of you who are interested will like it. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.